Perfect. Um, Today we are hosting, so just a bit of history quick. There has been a subgroup of limited equity housing providers that have been meeting for the past 12 months or so. We formally decided to name ourselves because we were unnamed. And we are now the Washington Affordable Cooperative Housing Network, so the Watch Network. Um, One of our goals is to continue to have conversations with funders and policymakers and practitioners to really thread the needle on why we can't develop more limited equity housing cooperatives across the state and solve that. So this is the first of what we hope to have as like mini roundtable conversations with lenders and public and cooperative curious folks. Thank you guys for joining today. We are going to go through kind of an overview of what a limited equity cooperative is. We have a couple case studies, and then our goal is really to open it up to conversation specifically talking about lending and funding limited equity cooperatives. Um, if you're in the wrong space, just stay and you'll find that limited equity cooperatives are in the amazing and you should learn more. Um, but let's go ahead and get started. Um, so Sandy Bishop is going to lead us through, Sandy Bishop with Lopez Community Land Trust is going to lead us through what is a housing cooperative and what it isn't.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'll try not to read, exactly what is on the slide, but I added what are community land trusts as well because on Lopez we work, with community land trusts holding the land, and then we have cooperatives, enjoying the ownership of the improvements. So a cooperative, is run and owned by its members, and they share profits and benefits. So that's really in a nutshell what a cooperative is. And then limited equity cooperatives, are just really a cooperative that makes a commitment to a restricted resale value. And we have found, doing these for the last 35 years, that the limited equity part really puts an emphasis on permanently affordable housing. And so, we chose that because we happen to live in a very high-priced area, and we need to keep, entry-level housing accessible. So, yeah, it's just a way to deepen the affordability. I'll just go through a few comparisons. Most of you are probably familiar, fee simple ownership rules, right? That's what primarily a lot of people do. And then there's condominiums, right? And they define by having the right to occupy a specific unit. And then there's that non-exclusive interest in common property. And then there is the cooperative, right? So the cooperative member really does not own real estate. And that's a defining aspect of cooperatives because it is the nonprofit, in our instance, the nonprofit corporation that owns the real estate, all the improvements, and members simply own a share, okay? So they have security of tenancy through a proprietary lease, but there is no resale of property within a cooperative. It is just a transfer of rights as one member leaves and another member comes in. So this a little bit about the structure, a limited equity co-op being a nonprofit corporation, and it is only made up, the only people who can be members in a limited equity cooperative are those that are there occupying a unit. It doesn't have outside shareholders or members. And then each specific unit is tied to the share, and the resale is kept affordable through a formula that is transparent at the beginning. When you become a member, you understand what you are getting, what your rights are, what your responsibilities are. And, for the most part, limited equity co-ops focus on democratic control and permanent affordability. And regardless of what is happening in the marketplace, they are fairly stable within a community. We'll go in probably later when case studies on how CLTs and limited equity cooperatives interact. So we can skip that part for now. So challenges. I often, when I talk about the challenges of limited equity co-ops, I only have one, and that is finding construction and mortgage financing. I added a few others for today. But really that is the biggest challenge that I've found in these last 35 years. That is the one thing that prevents us from being able to be more robust in churning out limited equity co-ops. There's, of course, there's the renewal of commitment to cooperative principles as new members come in and out. And that has to do with, legacy of information and all. And then stewardship and maintenance of buildings and the built environment. I think regardless of whether it is, a fee simple ownership or rental, that has specific challenges for a myriad of reasons. And then there's often a lack of experience, not just from the members, but interacting with limited equity co-ops among the financial, either through the financial institutions, any kind of insurance, anything. So there's this lack of experience, and that can also be challenging. Well, I really won't read all of this to you, but we were talking the other day, I was talking with somebody out of the public health, doing a study on public health and housing, climate, and community and adaptability. And one of the things we were saying is that, there comes this point when you can do all the preparation you want for some big event that's going to happen, whether it's, through wildfire, flooding, earthquake, whatever. But when it really comes down to it, it's the relationships. It's how a community knows each other. It's how they make decisions. It's really about not so much planning for a big event and trying to think through everything, but in everyday life, prepping yourself, building relationships, knowing how the systems work, how a building works, who your neighbors are, all of that kind of thing. And speaking of fires, floods, earthquakes, I think we've all experienced this about land. One of the reasons we chose to combine community land trusts, where the land is held in trust and then the cooperative, owns the improvements. One of the reasons we really like that relationship is that we've all seen when a built environment is destroyed for whatever reason, the land is essentially then on the open market and can be bought for pennies on the dollars because it's a devastation, right? Everybody is vacating the property, but by holding land and having it there to rebuild, instead of being, you know, basically given away by maybe investors for a later development, having that access to the land, I think, makes all communities much more resilient. Um, and yeah, there's something about people engaging with each other. cooperatives are both a business and a neighborhood organization. And so there's a balance between, how you operate with each other. And I think what I've seen over these last several decades is that whether people intend to be really civic minded, they become very well versed in democratic principles by being engaged in a co-op. And I have found, that it leads them to make pretty good, they're managing their own money, but they're also having to look out for the co-op as a whole. And I think it tends to make people a little better at money management. They're, I think, a little more careful as neighbors because you realize, okay, I have to do business with this person as well. So, it helps people, I think, temper how they're interacting. And overall, I find, or what I've seen from cooperatives, is it is a nice balance for those who can't afford to get into a fee simple house of any kind, and they really don't want to be subjected to renting their whole lives. So it gives them access to this hybrid between ownership and rental and a way to exercise their own governance over their own housing.
Before we dig into the case study, thank you, Sandy, for that general overview. Before we dig into and talk about the case studies, does anybody have questions about what is a limited equity cooperative? What are the functions, the mechanisms? We could speak all day about different aspects, but are there questions about a limited equity cooperative? Yes, Ian, I see your hand. I saw your hand and your head.
So I just wanted to verify, are limited equity cooperatives always nonprofits?
For the most part, it depends. Like in Washington State, yes, they are Washington State nonprofits. They typically are not a 501 federal nonprofit. They could be, but there's a lot of complications to get them to that standpoint and that place. So it's especially now, it's not going to happen. But yes, in Washington State, assuming that they incorporated under RCW 2406, they are Washington State nonprofits.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I've
wonderful. Thank you.
seen, I've never seen a limited equity co-op register itself as a for-profit. I've seen other cooperatives register as for-profit, but I've never seen that with an LEC.
Can I speak real quick? I think they once existed long ago, like in the 50s and 40s. And a lot of times it was, the baby boomers coming back from the war. My first house in Denver was owned by Lockheed Martin, and it was built in the late 40s. And they were all for employees of Lockheed Martin in those houses. And you see this, we had the timber industry do the same thing for decades and decades and decades. There's towns in Oregon and Washington that were created by timber companies. There's Kohler, Wisconsin was created by a plumbing manufacturer. So these things have gotten, they're just partnerships, I think, that could have been for profit, right? In the past. Now it is more of this, it is a government backed entity because we've gotten values so much higher now, for various factors. That's probably the biggest thing we're dealing with is the fact that we have the ultra low rates and the ultra high costs. And this is why we're having to go to a nonprofit format rather than businesses actually stepping in and trying to do this too.
So the reason that I ask, and just to be clear, LLCs are also for profits, is that the type of funding that is available from state sources has an impact, a tax liability on the organization depending upon its incorporation style as a for-profit or nonprofit. So that's why I was asking. So thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Yep. Are there other questions about how limited equity cooperative, what it is or isn't, the functions, the mechanisms? And I just want to state for the record, there are limited equity cooperatives in Washington State. So the development and the creation of them is not impossible. NWCDC currently supports 31 limited equity cooperatives. There's other limited equity cooperatives that have incorporated independently outside of any of us in this room today. And Sandy has limited equity cooperatives that Lopez CLT has, and we'll go into those case studies right now. So, Denise and Dane, do you guys want to talk about EcoThrive and what you guys are working on?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And Dane, you can fill in any gaps that I leave out.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so EcoThrive Housing formed back in 2020 after talking to really hundreds of people and asking the question, what do you need to thrive? And the patterns that we heard in their story, we didn't think we were going to start building real estate, but what people really need is affordable, financially stable housing. Really, at any income level, the financial stability of houses is really important. And the other thing that we heard in those stories is that when people's lives weren't thriving, the thing that made the difference was community. Either a coworker, a friend, a family member, somebody was there to help them over a bridge of uncertainty and chaos in their lives. And so we really looked at that and looked at where are there models of affordable housing where it's really emphasizes community. And of course, what we found was the whole cooperative ecosystem. And within that system, we're lucky to be in the same state as Lopez Community Land Trust on Lopez Island, which formed in the early 90s. And they've been really generous with us in building a knowledge base to really have the courage to say, you know, what people say they need is food, water, shelter, community, gardens, love, music, the things that kind of feed your soul, as well as the things that put a roof over your head and keep you alive. And so we looked at, there's a model down in Eugene, Oregon, Square One Villages. They're now building their fourth village of permanently affordable home ownership. That was another thing we were committed to because that's the only way you really have financial stability is with a mortgage. And how do you create an affordable mortgage? And so we're like, we want to create a limited equity cooperative. And we pitched the idea to Seattle, City of Seattle, and just the zoning wouldn't work. So after 2.5 years of trying to make progress there, we started conversations with the city of Burien, and they created the Affordable Housing Demonstration Program in 2019, which created a zoning pathway for us to build small cottages and a common house with a nestled in a landscape of edible plants, again, food, water collection systems. All these things are actually really viable for moving into climate disruption, which is what's happening. And then, like Sandy was saying, also because it's a limited equity cooperative and people are literally co-invested in their community, there's the skills they practice, they learn and practice the skills for self-determination and making decisions together and resolving conflicts. So that's the model that we have been wanting to go for, but like has been said, we can't get the permanent financing for limited equity cooperatives. So at this point, we just got our conditional use permit last month. And so, we're hoping the system evolves fast enough for us to be able to do a limited equity cooperative. But if that doesn't get to happen, it will be a condo model with community covenants is how we're going to sort of strap this project together at this point, because we can't get the permanent financing. We can get the construction loans, except we don't have enough liquidity in our bank account. So that's our current challenge. But that's probably how we're going to move forward. And I'll stop now. Happy to take questions and happy to talk to people after this call. And again, really grateful for this network of support because it's not easy. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Um, Now we're going to have Uche with Homesite talk about the ULEX project. Uche, do you want to take it away and talk about your project? Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure a lot of you know about the OLU project that we're building in South Seattle in the Rainier Valley. Olu is a Lushootseed word for gather, and we named it because the Coast Salish people, they were the stewards of the land, and we want to continue to do the same by providing the permanently affordable homeownership opportunities in this multifamily building that would combine community and healthy building practices, et cetera. It's part of HDC's exemplary building program. And we decided that we wanted to build this sort of model just because we're trying to meet the demand of first-time homebuyers, especially in Seattle, which, as Denise and others have said, is becoming more and more expensive. But, of course, developable land is more scarce. Land acquisition is expensive. Construction prices are expensive. And so that affordability gap is getting bigger and bigger. So how are we able to, provide an opportunity for low and moderate income households, families, individuals, especially the first-time home buyers, to have their opportunity to build assets? And so we felt like limited equity cooperatives was a good way because the affordability would be in the price of entry. This gives people an opportunity, a rung in the ladder to get into that home buyer space. However, because it is a new model, it's not a common model, I guess. I'll rephrase because I know there are a lot of cooperatives. Lopez Island has been around for quite some time, but it's been difficult to secure the construction of permanent financing. For us, that was the biggest challenge. When we started back in 2018, we started with a local construction lender, and then we had National Co-op Bank come in to provide the permanent blanket loan after the construction is completed, but then COVID happened and those lenders pulled out, of course. And we approached a lot of conventional banks, but the unfamiliarity of the product made that difficult to have them come on board. And then the size of the construction loan, because this is a 68 unit project, made it difficult for community banks and credit unions to get involved without having to, what's the word? Not collaborate, but partner together to provide the construction financing. And so we had to go for a HUD loan through HUD's Section 213 program, which, with the fact that it's a HUD product, there's a lot of added costs. There's Davis-Bacon, there's the application fees, there's the processing, there's the reporting, all of those things. And so what was a $36 million project has now ballooned to a $46 million project. Not very much has changed except for the financing of it. We are lucky on the share mortgage side to partner with Verdi Credit Union to provide the share mortgages for the individual buyers. But if those if the share mortgages have to stay in their portfolio because there isn't a secondary market for them to sell it to, it limits their ability to provide share mortgages for other buyers in other projects. And so that's also been a challenge. I definitely, if I were to do this again, maybe a smaller project with less units so that finding the financing on both sides isn't as challenging, you know, um, and avoid Davis-Bacon wage rates for sure. You know, I would definitely want to replicate this. I mean, we're going to replicate this. We just have to figure out how to solve for these challenges. You know, with this project, we're hoping that it's, you know, showing that this is a solvable problem and get funders comfortable, get them to buy in, and yeah, get more comfortable.
Thanks, Uche. I appreciate it. Um, and so the last project that we're going to highlight, or last group that we're going to highlight, is Lopez CLT, and Sandy is going to talk about some of her hybrid models and what she's been working on.
Oh, here I am. Yes. Snap to it. Thank you, Uche and Denise. I appreciated hearing that. So I just want to, yeah. So anyway, we incorporated in 1989, and I'll tell you the reason we started doing limited equity cooperatives is Washington Mutual Bank, which was a beloved bank. Remember that before they ate themselves from the inside out? Um, the vice president of lending came up to Lopez Island, and her name was Pat Homan, and she began talking to us. We were set up to do more traditional community land trust style, where the land trust owns the land and you subdivide it, and then the homeowners have a fee simple home, and there's that 99-year relationship. And she looked at us, and we're in a rural community. At the time, a lot of people were considered not bankable. And Pat Homan, vice president of lending, said, look, why don't you form a limited equity cooperative? She said, I've, worked in lending and housing all over the country, and it's a good model, especially if you're working with populations that are not considered bankable, not because they don't have good credit, but maybe they don't have any credit. Maybe they only use cash. They don't like credit cards. Their work history is such on an island like ours, which is rural. Maybe it's a little spotty. All these reasons why. So we said, that sounds good. We learned about limited equity co-ops. And so it started out that we did them for financial reasons, because that's the only way the bank would lend to us, right? But over the last 35, 36 years, we have found so many aspects of why in a rural community like ours, it really works well to have a limited equity co-op and a community land trust in relationship with each other, one holding the land and then the cooperative owning all the improvements and doing self-governance. So that was our first push towards, and Pat took this idea back to the bank, and they shut her down. And she said, well, look, I think I'll just make a private loan to these people. If for whatever reason they ever do default, I'll have 7 beautiful homes on Lopez Island, and I'll have put in, probably 20% of the value of them, right? Because we had raised so much to subsidize them. Well, anyway, long story short, they decided they would lend. And that was the way it was for a couple of years. They said they would do other projects with us. I have to say, in all the years we've been doing this, there has never been so much as a hiccup anywhere. You've got the Lopez Community Land Trust, and then you've got the co-op, and then you've got the individual. Everybody has a stake in the game, and nobody wants to risk a default, because it doesn't just happen on one person, right? The co-op owns the improvements. It happens everywhere. So this is high level buy-in, and there really isn't any risk, as far as I can tell, for financial institution. I think there is a fear because limited equity co-ops sit a little bit outside the box and people don't know how to define it. But I want to hear later on today on what is the big hurdle with us not being able to be funded. So at any rate, that was our first one. I just want to tell you a little bit about the financing because I think for all of us, that is our biggest obstacle. Everything else we can, do workarounds on it. When we did our second co-op, which was a couple years later, the Washington State Housing Trust Fund, which at the time was, it had only, I think in '88 it got its first funding or something. So it was relatively new, but they said, look, rather than going out and trying to, get all this money together to help subsidize these houses so you can go to a bank and get a loan on basically at market rate, why don't we lend you, make a 60-year loan at 1% to cover all of our costs, and we can do that. So that's what we did for our second co-op. And that, of all the loans that we've ever gotten, allowed us to it really streamlined everything for us. We were able to we knew we had our financing because we basically could finance 80% of it with this long-term 60-year, 1% loan. And the other 20% we could raise locally, and it was no problem. And again, we only make payments once a year because nobody want to mess around with it being elsewise. But then Housing Trust Fund informed us they would certainly never do that again, and wish they had never done it in the first place, tying up their money like that. I don't know what all the politics were around that. So then that led us to, there was a local bank here called Islanders Bank, and we persuaded them because they could hold their notes internally and not have to sell them on the secondary market. So they started financing us, but our local bank got eaten by a larger bank. And when they found out that our local bank had made 3 or 4 separate loans to these limited equity co-ops, they just said, well, that'll never happen again. So now we didn't have a local bank. So the last 3 projects we've done, we've had to go through the SET loan through the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. And the SET loan was really not set up to do this. It's just that we build net zero energy homes. So we've been able to do that. And everybody at the commission has been fabulous in dealing with us, either a 10-year or 15-year loan amortized over 25 to 30 years, 1.5% interest, and it does work for us. But they have told us every time we've done this, they really can't do it. It's not that it violates what SET is all about. It's just that it wasn't really meant to do this. So there's lots I could tell you about Lopez Community Land Trust and how successful it is and how it works in a rural environment and how incredibly thriving it is. And the more co-ops we do, the more they talk to each other, the more we find, best practices are shared amongst each other. The way in which a community like ours can survive and become more resilient is by people being able to self-govern and self-care without needing, a lot of other agencies to come in all the time and either take care of their rents or whatever. But I guess my main point is if we had access to long-term financing, that would be key for us. We have been fortunate in that we have been able to put together about $600,000 for member shares, those member shares. But we really have not been able to put together money so that we can finance these construction projects. And we do not qualify we're not big enough to qualify for any HUD. I checked in with the USDA about 10, 12 years ago, and they said, yes, they have cooperative housing on the books and they could fund them, but they've buried that funding so deep that they don't think it will ever be revived. And this is not a good time anyway to be going out trying to make relationship with federal funding sources. So I'm really hoping today we can light on a few things that would help us release some funding, some designated funding that includes limited equity co-ops. I mean, we all know how challenging it is to do housing under the best of conditions, but if you've got funding sources, you can at least then turn your attention to all the other factors that seem to be conspiring to keep us from ever building any housing. So I think I'll just leave it at that and we can have questions and answers, but I really appreciate this conversation a lot.
Thank you, Sandy. Anne, I see your hand is up.
So, pardon me, I got really triggered because Sandy, you used the phrase, well, Housing Trust Fund said they're never going to do that again. And I'm like, okay, I may have said that in private about a number of things when I was working with multifamily projects, but I sure as heck have never said that in homeownership. And so I was texting Angela, I'm like, what Lopez project have we done? And she's like, we haven't done any. And I'm looking, and Housing Trust Fund hasn't done any projects with Lopez Community Land Trust since, I want to say,
Well,
2011.
yes, 2012 was the last time we received any money. When we applied, we never made we stopped applying. We never made your cut. And it was
Okay.
a lot of work for us. So
Yes.
we have turned elsewhere now. We have to do all of our funding without state or federal help, but it would be lovely if I knew there was some fighting chance that we could.
Well, absolutely. I would strongly encourage you outside of this meeting to set up a meeting with Angela and myself and her staff to talk about our upcoming funding cycle where we have almost 100, well, we have what, $73 million available to award competitively because we absolutely can fund limited equity co-ops and we can absolutely fund what we've been talking about through all of this. And as long as no one is seeking funding for a for-profit organization, we are green light and we are open to all sorts of creative approaches to creating home ownership. So I am very sorry that I did not know ahead of time that you had had that experience and had been outside of the family, if you will, in all this time since we were created as a unit.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, let's talk.
part of it is there's a lot of policy changes and what would be most helpful for us is finding long-term financing. Um, it's the it's the long-term financing,
Well, our
Yeah.
money of grants.
So, well, let's
Mhm.
dig into the long-term financing. I think like Anne and Sandy, you guys should chat for
Okay,
sure.
okay.
So one of the conversation that we really want to focus on and close this out here today and really spend a great deal of time on, and as you heard from Denise, Uche, and Sandy, the long-term financing is the foundation for the problem. The limited equity cooperative, we have plenty of practitioners across the state that are experts in cooperativism and can build and create a fully functional limited equity cooperative. We have plenty of practitioners across the state that can provide technical assistance and guidance to that cooperative as they learn how to own and operate their multi-million-dollar business. So the can we build it? Question. Absolutely. Like build it being the corporation. Absolutely. We can build the corporation. I'm fairly confident we could build you a rock solid limited equity cooperative in 30 minutes. If you told us that you had $20 million to give us, we would be able to build you a fantastic limited equity cooperative to use that money. But that money right now is a challenge to exist. So there's three main types of lending when we're talking about the challenged lending when we're talking about a limited equity cooperative. You've heard folks talk about a share loan. A share loan, think of it as the member's down payment into the cooperative business. It's kind of the best way to think about it. It's the member's equity. It's what they put into the limited equity cooperative, into the building, into the housing. It is their personal investment, and it is what actually has the resale restriction formula placed on it. So whatever that share loan is what the resale restriction is, and it's a combination of the share loan. It can be a combination of the equity gain in the asset. The limited equity resale restriction is specific to each cooperative, but it's largely based on what is that share loan and what is that member's initial contribution to the expenses of the cooperative. That right now has no place to be sold on the secondary market. So Uche mentioned that Verity is the one that's doing the share loans for their project. Sandy mentioned that they were able to secure enough funding to internally be able to provide share loans to their cooperative members. Um, the cooperatives that I work with, the manufactured housing cooperatives, their share loan, their equity cap by policy and model caps at $1,000. So there is no loan for that $1,000. That's an individual contribution, and there's a promise to pay if the individual does not have $1,000 at the time of closing. So share loan lending, that is a big bucket that we need to address. Construction loan to permanent loan is another bucket that needs to be addressed. And those part of that is that there is not a place right now for some of this to be sold on the secondary market. And so this has to become bank held debt, or it becomes financed through a large stack of combination of subsidiary financing and subsidy financing. And so that is really how it's happening right now. Subsidy financing or HUD financing is financing the construction to perm. Otherwise, it has to be bank held debt. And so that's the conversation. These are the three kind of loan products that we want to talk through and talk through our lenders with, talk with our lenders with. Um, so now I'm going to turn it over to the awkward silence of who wants to speak first. Rob does.
Rob.
Fantastic, Rob. Go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to add for the share loan, like another way to think about it, it's kind of like a home mortgage. It's just a mortgage is backed by real estate. The share loan's backed by your stock and the limited equity cooperative itself. It's similar but different in some fundamental ways. On the construction loan side, I also just wanted to add, similar to that, there's actually a pretty large gap for the actual pre-development costs and soft costs, like paying the architect and the structural engineers, all these things, which is even harder to get financing for. And you need to have all these things done in order to actually close on a construction loan as well. So there's another whole gap, kind of part of the construction process, but prior to actually like pouring concrete and building walls and all that, that rolls into that. And on the permanent loan side, the last piece is, you can think of it like a blanket mortgage on the cooperative itself. Because in Washington State, at least, the only equity ownership of a cooperative has to be the members living in the cooperative, and therefore those, the actual residents themselves. For all other lenders, there is no way to bring in outside funders or investors to sit in an equity position on a limited equity cooperative. When you think about a lot of what lenders are looking for with like loans to value, loans to cost, it makes it pretty challenging without having that equity ownership piece to actually back a lot of these loans. So thinking of ways of treating subordinate debt, subordinate financing as basically equity is a big part of maybe unlocking this puzzle on the permanent financing side. Happy to talk more, but I'll hand it off to someone else too.
Those are fantastic points. I think that yeah, we could get cooperative wonky here and talk about multi-stakeholder cooperatives, but that's
right.
But yes, yeah. Go ahead, Sloan.
Well, just going to piggyback on what Rob said a little bit. And, back up a little bit to the shared loan. Part of the problem with a lot of the banks is just understanding that shared piece. Most banks, what people don't realize is they don't think the same. They have different attorneys with different opinions. Every one of them may have a different opinion about this. So the more banks you're able to get out and see, the better, especially in your community, because they may have different policies internally. And it literally can boil down to how their attorneys look at it. That's one big problem. The second big problem, as Rob identified, is construction really is broken down into two development pieces. One is what we would call the dirt, and that is the excavation, all the utilities, all of that going into the project that have to be there before they can do the vertical construction, which is a different set piece. The problem with the banking world right now is nobody has those funds available. What was before COVID was kind of the bread and butter of a banking system was the commercial loans. You know, they're 5 to 7 to 10 to 15 years maybe in term, but that's what they're dealing with right now is they have all these loans coming due. I mean, we're talking billions and billions of dollars coming due of office buildings that are basically empty. And what are these businesses going to do in the future is where the bank's pressure is. And that's why you're not going to see them spending money on other projects that might be more risky, like development funds. So that's the crux. My suggestion has always been the same thing. The community land trust has to figure out how to get some type of monthly income going. And my suggestion in the past has been maybe doing a doc in the box or working with the medical side of things. They're really interested in this piece because housing is a medical problem for most of the health insurers. It's becoming more and more. I think, you know, at times you have to have something where you're getting rents on that property, maybe a separate piece where you're seeing some type of income so that they can at least show there's a monthly basis of servicing that debt. Not all the money going into these community land trusts are from grants and other partitions or selling off a property, which the cycle is probably like close to 7 years. So that's your problem. That's your crux. All these community land banks up and down the West Coast are probably not going to be your best option. The other problem is just how the banks are structured. Oregon and Washington, Idaho all deal with the Iowa Home Loan Bank. Okay, that's where they get their federal funds from. Reality is that I've worked for the San Francisco Home Loan Bank, and I can tell you the way that they approach affordable housing and the programs that they're pumping out from there, I would look to banks in California, Arizona, Nevada that are willing to come up in here and use some of those funds. But there are great grant programs that help the permanent financing for the homeowners to get in. WISH, Workforce Initiative Subsidy Housing Grant, which is almost $38,000 right now. It's a 4-to-1 match. They have a middle housing grant that they're working on that's $50,000 that will go up to 140% of AMI. AMI, I don't know if you all saw this, but AMI just increased across the country by about 6.9%. So my suggestion too is the way the landscape is now, we're going back to pre-2008 kind of era. And Kim can attest to this, but back in those days, over 50% of all loans were done from the broker community. The retail banks, the banks, they have way too much overhead. How they're going to compensate you right now is giving you grant funds or just donating money. I live in Bend, Oregon. I watch it all day long over here. You know, but that goes back to the consumers. In 2008, we changed all the rules so that every transaction, we're all limited in the mortgage space on how much we can make. And this has affected a lot of those state-run housing programs, such as Oregon Housing right now. But I can tell you that as of Wednesday, the market share of all mortgages done right now, the broker share is up to 29.7%. Tina, you asking me a question?
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just trying to figure out how to raise my hand and Miles
you
is
got it.
first.
Yeah.
I'll have a comment after everyone
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to raise my hand too.
There's a little
So
button.
go to React where there's the heart icon, and you'll be able to raise your hand.
Miles,
And
you
let's,
wanna weigh in?
yeah, I mean, we haven't, Victoria, we haven't mentioned the Rock program yet, but I think there's actually a lot happening within that program to kind of respond to some of the challenges of lending that are actually not so challenging when you're in a ROC. And ROC is resident community. It's a manufactured housing model that's preservation specific. And those loans flow in through WCRA and often Rock Cap, or used to at least Rock Capital in New Hampshire. And they're based off pre-existing rent rolls. They're really secured strongly off pre-existing rent rolls that are Victoria looks at from the last 10 or 15 years. Those rent rolls turn into carriage fees for a cooperative. And then there's a 10-year technical assistance agreement. And so those are very secure loans. There's 300 rocks that have been preserved across the country. I think Victoria has 30 plus in her portfolio. And we're about to start talking about next steps and also see who wants to join a more focused group here. That in that theme of next steps in Montana, Front Step Community Land Trust, which used to be North Missoula CDC, has almost fused with the Rock model, working with NeighborWorks Montana to create a pilot loan product. They did, 4 years ago, that was heavily modeled after that Rock program, which has been doing very secure, work for like the last 12, 14 years. To do two preservation projects in Missoula, and are a very successful model. They're very open source about sharing documents, underwriting documents, etc. And they're also going to be co-hosting the Northwest Community Land Trust Coalition Network meeting in the fall. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about what's happening in that example. And that is a CLT limited equity co-op hybrid, which also I think demonstrates a lot of strengths around security because you've got that broader community investment and stewardship happening.
Can I
And
just
then Tina, were you next? Go ahead,
well,
Victoria.
I just want to highlight a couple points that you made. So one, the ROC program is able to be successful because the loan underwriting looks at the success of the individuals. We have it's a conversion program. So what Denise and Uche and Sandy are talking about are development. We are developing from the ground up a limited equity cooperative. That's why we need the construction to perm financing. The ROC program is a conversion, it's a preservation program. And so these are looked at slightly differently because we're looking at just acquisition lending at a conversion. We're not looking at construction lending. So there's a slightly better advantage because acquisition lending is slightly easier to obtain. And the underwriting that happens in the ROC program is looking at the individual's history, as Miles highlighted, and looking at what is their AR for the current operations of the current ownership. And so one of the things that I wanted to translate that and highlight that is from a policy perspective, there's been policy introduced in the past about allowing people's rental history to be part of the underwriting for their potential mortgage. And that could play a role in all of this as we think about somebody's rental history and their ability and their underwriting. One of the challenges that I've heard in the past from lenders is, well, we can't do a construction loan or a permanent loan. We can't do any long-term financing because we don't know who are the members of the cooperative. We can't underwrite their ability to pay. It's not an individual, it's a collective. And as we've said in the past, and most often, our low and moderate income individuals are not typically bankable. And so there's an extreme high risk that the lenders perceive. So if we were able to look at creative solutions, which would be looking at rental history, which would be looking at employment history, different things rather than looking at just their credit score, which may or may not be good, and their lack of bankability, that would continue to open up doors for us, and for development and preservation, and using the limited equity cooperative model. Um, so Lisa, or no, Tina, you had your hand up.
Well, I know we're almost at time. I just was going to add a comment about the construction loan and pre-development part of this. So, LISC has a history nationally of doing loans to co-ops and community land trusts. I thought it was interesting to hear the like pre-2008 reference around lending. There is huge concerns right now in the overall CDFI world with portfolios being pretty stressed around affordable housing for, many of the reasons that we all know. So I know folks are tightening up their underwriting standards. The biggest conversation we are having internally about lending is the takeout for us and having takeout committed. And so for a place like Washington State, where share loans are still quite unusual and kind of challenging, it is, I think that even CDFIs feel fairly skittish about, we know how to do pre-development and construction lending, but like we don't know what's happening on the other end and how long it will take for us to be able to get to get that loan paid down and closed out. So I think I think that's the big nut to crack. I think once you know that you have your permanent financing, it's much easier to do the steps before it. So that's just kind of not solution based, just like kind of what I'm seeing right now.
I think that that's a really great question. And it's in comment. One of the things that I have been thinking through is that limited equity cooperatives like this are very typical and common in New York City. That is like the birthplace, the home. Every building almost is a limited equity cooperative. And they have built their model. The UHAB model is built with a limited equity cooperative that Freddie is comfortable to buy. So it is sold on the secondary market and Freddie purchases that loan product. What we
Fannie. Remember, Freddie's not doing it as Fannie.
okay. Anyway, it's sold on the secondary market. And so what we need is local banks and local lenders to step up and say, we will partner with you and we will partner with the GSE to create that tri-party agreement to continue to model this. And if we had local lenders that were willing to step forward and be part of that solution, we could just start with one and demonstrate the model and demonstrate the success and the ability for us to do this. We have so many multifamily buildings on the market right now, and we do not have enough lenders in Washington State to hold the debt of those buildings. And so and the same is true for the development of them. The same process would be true for a construction to perm. There's ways to make that possible, but we need lenders to step up and say, hey, we will partner with you to do the hard thing of working with a GSE to make this possible. One of the things I put in the comments was that NWCDC is working on LEC, multifamily LEC template documents. And one of the things that I personally will be working with is making sure that those LEC template documents are reviewed and approved by Freddie. So when we are ready, when that lender does step up and gives me a call, because I'll give you my phone number, that we can have that hard conversation and we don't have to go and recreate some of those documents, those framework documents that Freddie will be reviewing or Fannie will be reviewing and looking at. Kim.
So I just wanted to take a minute and say the secondary market piece is critical. And when Victoria and I were in DC, we had a conversation with Freddie that they were like, they were, totally stepping back and afraid. And we said, okay, but if the co-op is supported by a nonprofit organization that has a track record and a history and serves as a support safety, that shifted up immediately for them. Their eyes lit up. They were like, oh yeah, oh yeah. So I think we need to get Lisa DeBrock and her crew at the same table with Fannie and Freddie and the template documents Victoria is talking about. We can bring Idaho to the table if we have to, but to be able to get this rolling for first-time home buyers of low and moderate income, and then bring in the more open market lenders who also want to sell on the secondary market. Because I feel like we can make a pretty compelling case for the supported quality of CLT limited equity co-ops. Anyways, that's my little speech about the geeky secondary market.
Sloan.
So one better for you. Whoever wants to go, I can get this organized, but UWM is the largest lender in the country by about $50 billion. I've had some conversations with Mr. Ishbia about directly what we're talking about. This is a guy who actually believes in affordable housing. He just announced a 1% down program where his company is actually funding $7,000 for every one of them. It's not a profit. It's not out of anything. It's out of his pocket. But he's also running with a new 0% down program. Kim, I would look at the Home Smart program with Freddie because there is some cooperative language I looked into this morning on it. So there are programs that are rolling out, and we're going to see more and more of them. I can get whichever community land trust wants to, I can get Ishbia to bring you out to Detroit, meet with his people, and talk about this problem with them. This is, again, the largest lender in the country. So when they go approach Fannie and Freddie, they listen.
Right.
And one of the biggest changes that have come about, title charges. They have attacked the title industry with the lender coverage, which is saving my clients somewhere around $1,400 a transaction just not having that. So they're making tweaks to it. They've also taken away mortgage insurance. I don't know many people know this, but mortgage insurance is a profit to most banks, and that is scaled down. I'm seeing my mortgage insurance figures half of what other lenders are. But if we want to push this forward, we got to get a bigger player in the room. And we have access to Mr. Ishbia, and I think this would be something that he's looking at moving towards. He's very big on affordable housing. He's very big on the next generation of homeowners.
Sloan, you said he's in Detroit?
Yeah, but he'll fly us. He'll fly us in increments. I could probably go 5 at a time. He will pay.
I just meant I have a close colleague in Detroit who's doing some really groovy affordable housing stuff. And so we might be able to bring him to our meeting as well.
Absolutely. But if anybody's interested, I'll leave my information on the chat here. It would be basically you and several other real estate agents. They do it every Wednesday. They will send you the plane flights. They pay for everything. The only thing I would have to do is make sure you get from the Detroit airport up to Pontiac, which is about a 45-minute cab ride or limo ride, however you want to do it. You Uber, however you want to say it. But the bottom line is that I think if we get some of these eyeballs that are bigger on the movers and shakers in the industry, this is where you're going to get traction behind it.
I completely agree. Yeah. Well, and so all of that. That's fantastic. Thanks. Thanks for the offer. I think everybody here is like, oh, okay, well, if give me a free plane ride to Detroit. Not that I have any desire to go to Detroit, but whatever.
I know it is Detroit. I would strongly suggest take me up on that offer in the late summer, early fall type range. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we could. I'll reach out to them and just see. And again, I'm going to put my email in here. So anybody that has any moderate interest in it, I will get back to you with some details on it.
reading Dan's comment here. So I think what I'm summarizing here is I know that some of us may want to go to the HDC membership meeting, and I think some people are popping off. Um, this isn't the end of the conversation. Our goal with this conversation was to have comments just like what Sloan made. We need lenders to partner with us, to do hard things, to be in process with us, and to have that shared vision for the end goal. Realizing that, there's work that needs to happen here, that subsidy funding is not the end solution, it's part of the solution, that selling the loan on the secondary market is not the only solution, it's part of the solution, that having local funders and credit unions to come in partnership with some of the more questionable niche loan products like share loans are part of the solution, that all of these have to work together. And we're looking for partners to come in and to meet with us on a regular basis, to have those creative conversations so that we can move this movement forward. We know that this is part of the solution that we are facing in Washington State. We know that cooperative housing and shared equity models do work, and they work well throughout the cycle of economic downturn and boom and bust, and they are sustainable. And we simply just need to be able to build them to be able to ride that wave. And I appreciate these conversations. If you are wanting to be part of those continued conversations, you can reach out to myself, you can reach out to Miles, you can reach out to anybody that is on this slide here, and we will be working to establish a regularly scheduled meeting and work group. Miles, anybody from the Watch Network, is there anything else that you guys wanted to say in summary here?
I'd like to say thank you to everybody, but I still don't really, really understand what the big deal is, what the barrier is. It's nonsensical to me. You can call it a niche market or whatever you want, but just to have access to long-term funding, we are probably the most stable of any, in terms of stability, which banks love because they don't like risk. Limited equity co-ops, especially when combined with a community land trust, are probably the most stable investment anyone could make. You would never even see a hiccup anywhere. So I'm still puzzled by what the big deal is. Just saying. Can anybody in a nutshell? Is it just because Fannie and Freddie have not backed it? They call all the time here to our office saying, we've got these products. And I was like, do you actually have limited equity co-ops? No, couldn't possibly do that. But is that really what is preventing banks?
So-
Banner Bank bought Islanders Bank. So we lost Islanders, have Banner. They're fabulous people in terms of supporting affordable housing, but they don't like limited equity co-ops. And no one there has really been able to tell me what it really is.
So a big part of it is that co-ops originated in extreme East Coast urban centers. And then they jumped across the continent to San Francisco and a few other places on the left coast. But those original co-op structures were not always the best, not from a risk point of view, but they weren't always the best model. And so then now that co-ops have had a longer history, we've added the layer of limited equity, we've added the support of the nonprofit. Now that it's come all this way over almost 100 years, nobody really understands it because nobody was getting into it. So it's a combination of they weren't introduced at the prom. They haven't done this dance before. Sloan, you want to follow up with
I can just speak from experience when I was with Goldwater Bank and the ownerships of that portfolio, which is a $9 billion portfolio. He ended up, his main COO did not like the verbiage, and how they look at it is when they get a property back, irregardless if they're going to get it back or not, that deed had multiple ownership pieces on it because you had funds from the state. And I'm speaking to the one here in Oregon that I worked with a little bit, but you also had the bank's interest, the state's interest in the CLT. And that was what at least my ownership group got a little bit leery of because they didn't know if a property goes default, how that was going to play out.
But
And there's nothing defined
right.
there, and the state won't go out and say, yeah, we'll do that, or the community land trust will buy that back. That's where we kind of were at with that, but we needed some type of guarantee when if somebody went default in that project, how that would go back to the bank. And that's where
Well,
the confusion came.
well, and that's where the that's where we need a lender that's willing to enter into that tri-party agreement that yes, if we can have a lender that's just one today, and you're to your point, yes, there's national presence that has strong demand to expedite and move the GSE faster and quicker to execute. But we just need to demonstrate success of one and then be able to leverage that success. So yeah, I think to Ann's point right here in the comment here, they're not simple, they're not easy, and they do take a lot of work to create the lending structure to make it feasible. And so it's less attractive for somebody to invest their time in a potentially smaller return, an intentionally smaller return.
Yeah, I sort of think these are all just, yeah, excuses in some way. But at any rate, mostly developing housing in Washington State now, you have to try and subsidize about 70% of what it costs, right? You just have to do that now because wages are here, housing is there. So you've got 70% in the game already. You're asking a lender to come in for maybe 30%. You try and go to a co-op lender and they'll tell you, oh yeah, we're two points above, what everybody else in the market is paying. Anyway, everybody's got their angle on this, but it's just there's so little money, and it just seems like in a state like ours that is flush with money in so many ways, there could be a lending fund for limited equity co-ops that could go out for 25 years, and I'm not sure it would break anybody.
Yeah, and I think Dan mentioned that, Dan from Wishwick mentioned that in the comments in creating a limited equity fund. And I think that if there are people that are interested in helping us work with those social impact investors, and there's philanthropic companies that need to do that community reinvestment work, that we would be happy to continue those conversations. And I think that it's a yes and, like I said before, it's a talking to the GSEs and finding a lender that will sell in the secondary market. It's finding that subsidy to make it truly affordable in Washington State. Both of these need to happen simultaneously. Okay. Any
Can I
last
chime in real quick,
Yes,
Victoria?
Smile.
One thing we haven't mentioned yet is that the Watch Network, we've been working together as a small team of co-op and CLT practitioners over the last about a year and a half, primarily as a policy group. And over the last two sessions, we've put forward a couple of bills, a proviso, namely to promote a pilot investment project that would seed a revolving loan fund for both blanket mortgage pilot program, ideally through WISHFIC, Washington State Housing Finance Commission, and to support a revolving share loan fund that would likely not be run through WISHFIC, but perhaps through Northwest Cooperative Development Center, where Victoria works, given that they are kind of the hub for worker cooperative and affordable housing cooperative here in the state, and they have an existing revolving loan fund program. And it's been a tough couple of sessions, as you all know. But what we're really, I think, next steps that I'm seeing is who's willing to join a smaller focused meeting to discuss how we can pilot something, pilot a product. Perhaps it's subordinate position or pooling some CRA resources and supporting one of these projects, whether it's something in the pipeline on Lopez or a preservation project that Victoria is investigating, because I know Victoria gets calls all the time about opportunities. And maybe if you wouldn't mind just putting in the chat your response to that question, like, is anyone here willing to or interested in joining, really Washington specific follow-up meeting about our next step to developing this pilot option. And we'll make note of that and we'll reach out to you. The other thing I wanted to mention is Watch's meeting. We're again a small group. There's maybe 7 or 8 of us that meet regularly each month, but we're looking to broaden our participation, and we meet once a month via Zoom. So please email Victoria or myself if you're interested in being part of this group, because we're a new group, and it's an exciting time to be participating. So we'd love to have more WA advocates and voices in the room. And keep educating your legislators.
Well, I'm reading Rob's comment as well.
We're also going to be hosting a state lawmaker meeting similar to this one. I'm not sure if we have it on the calendar yet, but I think what we'll do is we'll be building an email list off of the Zoom meeting today, and we'll follow up with folks, and there'll be more opportunities to continue this conversation in kind of a broader amongst a broader group of next up lawmakers.
Okay. So we expect to hear from you guys to tell us that you guys want to be part of our group, and that you are willing and interested in and want to partner and help support this movement. We are looking forward to broadening our support. Is there any last minute comments before we close out? Samia, I think we have a whole group of folks that is going to help you. We're doing so. If you're not following the chat, there is a growing movement of cities trying to figure this out too. Cities wanting to partner to try to figure it out so that they can preserve the affordable housing that is in these cities right now, the multifamily housing that's in the cities. Seattle is doing it. That they have a whole program, and like Erica ran, but Dominique and Joy are here. We're working on those conversations of like, well, what does Seattle need to do? Samuel just mentioned that Bellingham is interested in doing this and trying to figure out how do we use an LEC as a tool to preserve multifamily. And that's a whole conversation. If you know of a city that's wanting to have those conversations too, I think that's another actual separate sub work group of cities trying to figure out how do we use city money to do this, to protect and preserve the affordable housing. So if you know of a city, I actually encourage you just send them to me, and I'm trying to, like, I know Olympia wants to do this too. Like, let's all do it together and let's build the same thing because it seems silly to all build something differently, even though there's all the political drama between certain cities. But they all can have the same framework. They just don't need to know that it's the same framework and they'll be fine. Um, okay. Thank you guys for your time. We have recorded this and we will be posting it so that you guys can share it with other partners that you think should have been here. I will be following up with an email with a link to the posting so that you guys all have it. Thank you guys very much, and we look forward to our continued conversations.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.